for little kids in our life. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Murray.
Thanks, Diane. Well, as Diane said, we have been working on a project that Cardinal started, Good4Growth, and we have attempted to help pediatricians understand the recent science of really relationship building. It's more and more evidence indicates that the quality of the relationship between the child and an adult, and it's not always the parent who can supply that, but it may be a child care provider, a grandparent, a sibling. The quality of that relationship has everything to do with how the child progresses into school, academically, socially, and eventually their success and even their health and mental health as they get older. So we started to realize there's a lot at stake in early childhood. So we thought every month we would take a piece of what we've been working with pediatricians on and bring it to you and show you some very interesting science and how it begins to fit together. And if you come every month, I think you'll start to see how these all fit together into a really interesting picture of parenthood and grandparenthood and kind of what we can do a little bit better and get the most out of kids. One of the areas that I'm most interested in is language development. It's a fascinating an extremely complex thing that a child of this age does to understand objects in their environment and then apply a word for it that means nothing in and of itself, but they learn to apply it and then they learn to expand on that into reading and language and thought, and it's an astonishing accomplishment for someone so young. So I'm really interested in language, and I thought I would talk with you first about how we use words as adults with kids and what a difference it makes. So the first thing I think to understand is that if pregnancy goes well and life is good, then we're born with about 85 billion brain cells. They've been built particularly in the third trimester, but the thing that's striking is that it's all potential at birth. It's got very little connectivity and there's very little information flow. It's all potential. And then you think about it, the baby goes through that birth canal and all of a sudden is blasted with information. They've got sight and sound and noise and lights, and it's cold, and they have all their five senses are flooded, and they begin to move, and it's a real interesting environment for that child at that particular moment. So suddenly the brain is asked to start making connections and work. Let's see what we got here. Nope, did I miss one? This is being doggy on me here. There we go. So if you look at the, yes, this thing is being slow. There we go. If you look at what the baby is born with, they're born with what's been called a neonate's birthday kit. And it's a series of reflexes. You remember these? If you put your finger out, they wrap their hand around there. Every parent gets excited. Oh my God, he grabbed my finger. But that's that comes from the chimpanzee, actually. But they have all these other things, suck and swallow. If you brush their cheek, they turn their head toward that. I mean, it's a way of seeking the breast. They have a stepping reflex and so forth, fencing posture. And you figure, here's a baby that is armed with this, but not much else, discoordinated, can't see very well, can't make head nor tails out of all the noise in the room. And from this, they begin to build skills, one step at a time. And they use this to explore their world and begin to understand what is this. And one of the first things you remember that they do is they hear their mother's voice. They actually smell their mother. It's related to breastfeeding and other things. And they begin to use these reflexes, and they get skills as they start to recognize what's in the world around them. The ultimate goal of what we're trying to do by the time the kid is in their preschool years is we're trying to have built the brain's executive function. The thing that's interesting is that the brain undergoes a lot of development from birth all the way out until 3 in particular, first 1,000 days. And one of the things that you're trying to do is transition them from that highly emotional age, the terrible twos, where they're frustrated, they can't talk, they just can't express themselves, they flop on the ground, they scream and cry. And what you're trying to do is transition them from that highly emotional state to a much more front brain state. So the first thing that we have to do as parents, our first goal, is to manage emotions. First goal of all parents is to manage your own emotions first. Calm yourself down, then calm the child down, and then begin building these skills up. Things like their organizing skills, their focus, their ability to sustain a project, or even to accept failure, learn from it, and move on. This is the basis for learning in school, and it's also the basis for social learning and working with adults. One of the reasons Cardinal Health is so successful is that all of you know how to do this well. If you didn't, you couldn't make it in the adult world. So it's a really important time, that 1,000 days, where we as parents are trying to move them to get them to this executive function stage. And one of the key things that we have is language. The other thing I want to stress here, though, and this is an interesting thing, is that we're all different as parents, and we don't come into parenthood with the same expectations or history. We were all raised differently, and we bring that with us as well. We bring also a lot of other things, anxieties and worries, and sometimes even maternal depression after birth, and there's a lot of things that go into this relationship, including the response to the baby, that we have to learn as parents sometimes to overcome for the good of the baby. And that's why I thought this language thing is so critical. So communication is what wires the brain. It's 85 billion brain cells without connections, and how that baby explores the world is going to have everything to do with how the brain wires for life. And communication is the basis of that. So here's what we're looking at. Newborn on the left, you can see how sparsely those little black lines are. And those are the axons that connect brain cell to brain cell. And that's where information is going to pass. Look at how fast at a month, and then 9 months, and 2 years, I mean, it turns into a nest of different trees. It's called arborization. You get all these connections that occur. And then the most interesting thing happens. At age 3, we have the most connections between brain cells that we're ever going to have in our life. So potential as a newborn is fully manifest at age 3, and then we prune away 50% of those connections. And the ones we prune away are the ones that we don't use. So if a child grows up in a stimulating environment and they're talked with and everything that they do is interacting and stuff, the connections are going to be thick. They're going to get pruned away, the ones they don't use, but the ones they're using every day, communication, language, interaction, are going to get thicker and stronger, and that's a good sign for a baby. If the child is under stress and they have a lot of problems, it might be violence, it might be a chaotic household, they might be moving foster care to foster care, that particular child will strengthen those connections and will cut away the other connections that they may need to build that executive function. So this 1,000 days is a serious business for what happens to the child. It's all potential early on, and a lot of it has to do with how that child is raised and who communicates with them during that time. Well, I want to show you that this is a sequential thing. The first year of life, think about this. This is such an interesting thing. They put cameras on little toddlers, and little kids that are crawling or rug-ratting around to see what it is they do. And one of the things that they realize is that the kid basically looks at, with his head and his body, looks at one thing at a time. And the reason is, when we look at a room like this, we see carpet, chairs, paper, other people, and we have this figure ground. We know everything about chairism. It's got a box for chairs, and we don't even see the chair because that box is holding chairs. We know what that means. The kid, on the other hand, you put him on the ground, the rug, the chair, the ball, the table, the block, the fork, everything has equal unknown. They don't know what this stuff is. And so they'll touch stuff. As you know, they'll pick up anything and put it in their mouth to see, what's this? Can I eat it? That's the first thing. But this is very sensitive. So they explore their world first around all these things. So year 1 is taking that birthday kit and exploring everything they see, everything they touch. And you see when they get a little bit of skills, like one skill is banging. Remember that one? And so anything they get a hold of, one of the first things they do is bang it to see what's the sound. What does it do? Is it heavy? Is it light? Does it bounce? What is this thing? From that, if they're being kind of scaffolded by their parents and there's a lot of communication, they begin to use language to describe what they see. So they got a ball, they have an orange ball, and you say orange ball. And they eventually figure out the orange is the color and the ball is this round thing that rolls. The first time they do that, it's the orange ball is the ball. But what's very interesting to me is that in just a few months' time, they understand that ball represents all balls. It could be a little ball, a big ball, a basketball, a golf ball, a ping pong ball, that they all have ballness to them. And that the kid begins to understand that that's a ball, but so is that because of the properties of the ball. Think of how abstract that is. It's just a remarkable piece of brain work. So sensory exploration among objects, trying to understand, is a first-year thing. And then language is a second-year thing where they begin to lay this abstract set of words on that. And you can see that right after that, cognitive function takes off. So language is the basis for reading and the basis for cognitive function. That communication is a fundamental piece that bridges this first 3 years. This is called scaffolding, and it's what we're asking adults, not just parents, but all adults to do. And it isn't that you're trying to do something for them, it's that you're trying to take their exploration and augment it. And whether that's with language or that's with helping them understand something, stacking blocks or something, they look at a block and they look at another block and you teach them that you can put one on top of the other. That's scaffolding, because all of a sudden now the kid realizes, oh my gosh, these can go up. So it's adult support through everyday routines. And if you have kids, you know it's an all-day thing, and you scaffold at points whenever you can. You're highly responsive to the child's exploration. You're encouraging, you're interactive, and I think most importantly, you're playful. Play is the nature of education for kids. That's the basis of learning, is in play. So it's called scaffolding, and what we're trying to do is build executive function through scaffolding the child's interest. So let's talk about language then, how to talk with a child. The type of language that's being promoted now by the neurocognitive people in pediatrics is called serve and return. It's like tennis. You say something to the child, you ask them a question, or they say something back. And what's cool about serve and return is that it doesn't require words. So the child begins to do this from birth soundlessly. You know, they may make a sound, or they coo, they play with their tongue or something, and the parent imitates it. And they get their face right there, and they start that back and forth. So if the child does anything, the parent gloms onto that and expands it and serves back, and they go back and forth and back and forth. You can imagine as they get older and they're trying to use words in the second year and they're starting to try and put those together, if they use a word, this is ball, and you say orange ball, or you say bounces high, you're beginning to layer on, and that is scaffolding the child's interest in that ball and understanding it, and now you're beginning to push the envelope a little bit on their understanding. So it has everything to do with everything they do. It's linguistic, it's muscle memory, it's, you're trying to teach them motor skills, fundamental motor skills, how to kick, how to climb, how to hop. Those are all things that are part of this serve and return. And sometime I'm going to come back. I've told Diane I want to talk about disciplining a child, because one of the really exciting things to me is disciplining a child with this serve and return style, looking to build executive function. So it's not that you're punishing the child. It's that when they have a meltdown, you take that as an opportunity to use this style to move them towards stronger and stronger executive function. It all becomes one big package. But we'll talk about language today, and I'll talk about that another time. So here was a study that really rocked pediatrics on its heels in the 90s. It was by Hart and Risley. It's a very famous study, and I'm sure you've seen references to it periodically. They looked at 42 families, and they videotaped them an hour a month interacting with their babies. So they got 1,300 hours of baby and parent back and forth communication. And what they did is they looked at the 13 upper socioeconomic, and it turned out those were professors' kids on a college campus. And then they had middle, lower, and then they had impoverished families. And they wanted to see whether communication was different among socioeconomic groups. And they found, in fact, there was a dramatic difference between the upper socioeconomic group and the lower socioeconomic group. So what they found was that by the age of 4, the child from the upper socioeconomic group heard 45 million words by the time they got to the age 4. And in the lower socioeconomic group, it was 26 million, and in the child in poverty, it was only 13 million words. So you saw the press make a big deal out of the so-called 30 million word gap. And everybody was saying, well, we need to say more words to our kids. But that was only part of the study that they showed. There were many, many more words. That was the servant volley was back and forth from birth in the upper socioeconomic group. But a lot of other things were learned about this study. One of them is the type of words that were being used. It wasn't just 30 million word difference, but the higher socioeconomic group used affirmations all the time and rarely used prohibitions. Get off the chair, you're going to spill your milk, all those other kind of things. The lower socioeconomic group used almost exclusively prohibitions with very little encouragement. So the takeaway from that was, well, we need to say a lot of words, and we need to say a lot of encouraging words to help the child build their brain. When they followed those kids up at the age of 10, same kids, they found that this tracked out, that the fact that they had heard more words and more encouraging words continued to build their language and development skills, and you could still see differences at the age of 10. So obviously an important finding by Hart and Risley. But what I thought was this really interesting finding from one of their people who was studying this, is that the lower socioeconomic group didn't not talk with their kids because they were malicious or because they didn't care about their kids. They wanted the same thing for their kids as the upper socioeconomic group. The difference was they didn't understand development. And when they went and interviewed them, they found that they thought the kid couldn't understand words. So why would you use words talking to a kid that, it's like kind of stupid. It's like having a teddy bear and you're just talking away, So they said they didn't talk much. And mainly they were using language to keep the child safe. You're going to fall, you're going to fall. You're going to burn your hand. So it was all these prohibitions. But this is a simple thing to fix. If it's a knowledge of development that separates us, then that's something that's very easy to fix. And all you have to do is begin to incorporate in here a basic understanding of where the child is and then how you can use language to do that serve and volley, whether it's a newborn infant who can't talk but is beginning to lock in on eye contact and cooing, or it's an older child that's beginning to crawl and look for trouble all around the room. That child gets a different level of communication. And as the kid gets older, now upright, walking, has words, is coming to you to eat and things, now you're beginning to use an even higher level. So you're matching language with the child's development all the way up through those first 1,000 days. And to do that, you just have to understand what is their capability in terms of memory, in terms of their behavioral control. What's your expectation of a 15-month-old? It's low behavioral control. They don't have very good control of their behavior. But as you work with them and you get up older and older, they develop excellent behavioral control, and then you can begin to see how language helps to do that. So this was a finding, the finding that this is a developmental knowledge and not so much a difference in parents was a huge finding of that 30 million word study. And I think it really said, talk to your kids, communicate with your kids, not even talk, communicate with your kids, do so positively, scaffold what they're interested in and keep building on that. But at the same time, be aware of their developmental stage. And for us as physicians, that means we need to teach this as part of our health supervision visit every single time. We need to remind people what the child is capable of. So in the first year, when you think about what the baby's doing, they're trying to figure out, what is all this stuff that's around me? What's everything that I'm seeing? What's a teddy bear? What's a block? What's a brick? It's very heavy. These different things that mom has in her Tupperware drawer. They're trying to figure out what this thing is and what it does. What sound does it make? Do I put it on my head? Can I bonk it? When I bang it, does it click? What's happening? So the mothers who pointed to what the baby was playing with, pointed to it, and talked to that baby were the ones whose kids had the first imitation of words and developed the first affect with words. Because one of the cool things they learned about these language things is that language is very social, and so the kids take away the affect or the emotion of the way you say something and you say a word. So it's not just the use of the word, but it's got this emotional tinge to it. That's also part of this affirmation that parents did in the first year. In the second year, it was ones where they were imitating the child. So if the child called a dog a boggy or something, the parent would say something back and begin that serve and volley to pull it out, eventually saying, dog has long hair, or big dog, something like that, and you begin to start to augment and scaffold in that second year. Those kids had 50-word combination words and used memory earlier. We were just talking about, these are the kids who would, when you said, do you remember what we did yesterday when we went to the zoo, they would start talking about elephants or something. And that memory comes in the second year if it's scaffolded, if you pull it out and make them begin to practice memory. And then finally, pretend and symbolic play. This is the origin of language, reading, and cognition is play, symbolic play. And it's a very important thing. Maybe I'll come back sometime, we'll talk about symbolic play, because it's very, very cool to see how they use play to build their brain. So this is the takeaway. Serve and volley is the first thing that we need to remember, and that goes from birth. As soon as that child comes out, you begin that process of back and forth, serve and return. But also you want to add words and affect to the object of the child's exploration. They did this interesting experiment. They put a camera on the kid's head, and they put three objects in front of them. And they learned from that particular experiment that the child tends to turn their head and their whole body this way. They don't just track with their eyes. That's a later skill. So they realize that what the child is looking at, if there's three objects, they're not even seeing the other two objects on the side. They only see what it is they're focused on. So the parents who are right down there on the floor with them can see which object, and they can begin that conversation about that object. That's scaffolding. I saw a wonderful videotape of a mother where they asked the mother to play with the kid, and the kid's playing with this truck, and the mother keeps trying to get the kid interested in this cloth, and the kid isn't interested in the cloth, the kid's interested in the truck, and finally the mother just threw it over her shoulder. It's like, I give up, I can't work with this kid, Back to the drawing board. But this is really important. This is how the mother and child, and I say mother because that's normally who they're studying, how the mother and child share a way of looking. But as I said before, it does not need to be a biologic relative. It could be child care provider. It could be any adult who is invested in that particular child. So the other thing that's interesting about language is that it forms the platform on which reading and comprehension are built. So you can see the way kids play with sounds in the first year, and you see them playing with their mouth and doing things and blowing bubbles and stuff. They begin to play with words and begin to kind of twist the way you say things. It's the first kind of jokes and stuff that they do around messing with words. 2 to 4, you remember they all learn little games like Itsy Bitsy Spider that has, the representation of a spider and the sun and the rain and the whole thing. It's got a little song. And it's repetitious, and it's like a potato chip. They don't want to do it one time. They want you to do it with them 100 times a day. They really think that's just tremendous fun. That is a characteristic of this age group, and it's a way of getting them to play with language. And then finally, when they get older, they get quite sophisticated at messing with grammar, and that has a lot to do with their cognitive and social skills. So this is part of the play aspect. The second year is pretend play, where mom is on her cell phone and you see the little kid pick up a shoe and use it like a cell phone. They do the same thing. They know it's not a cell phone, but they they are pretending like mom. And they'll say the same types of things, you know, hello, grandma. They go through all this kind of stuff with it. That is the basis of symbolism, and it's the first foray away from reality. First year, a phone is a phone. It's a thing. This is it. And when you say phone, they mean this phone. But in the second year, it may be anything that the kid says is the phone, and they move over into this pretend realm, and that's the basis of language, where we're using a word that doesn't mean anything is now attached to that object, and later it's going to be some scrawl on a page that's going to represent that object. All of those things are sequentially linked in this kid's timeline. So play becomes a very important thing for kids, and it's important that we keep a very rich environment for them to do play. I don't know if my little devil here is dying or not here. There we go. So that's one of the things you want to remember on this whole thing is that, I don't know if I can go back or not. Well, it doesn't matter. The last slide just basically said, for kids, language is part of play. You're simply coming into their world as they're exploring, and you're applying communication to it. And that serve and volley is very, very critical to that. When do you do it? A lot of the parents have, when they've done focus groups and stuff, they'll say, I'm extremely frustrated. I want to read with my child. I just don't have time, or I don't have time to stop and do play with my child. And one of the things Barry Brazelton, who you may remember, he tried to get parents to realize that it's the magic of everyday moments. This isn't something that you carve out. It's something that just happens during. So if the child is there and you're cooking in the kitchen and they have something on the floor that they're exploring, you do your scaffolding at that moment, for sometimes just for a moment. You may do it again when you're feeding. You may do it again when you're cleaning up. Any place in the day that you're with the child is a time that you should be doing the scaffolding and the serve and return. It should be just a constant thing all the time. For parents who aren't comfortable doing that or haven't learned to do that on their own, we have to teach them, and that's part of the responsibility of the American Academy of Pediatrics, is to do a better job of binding this relationship and getting people to realize it's something that happens every day. It's not something that you have to carve out particular time for. So language is a really critical single piece in this development process of the brain, and then development of the little person, really, who, when they get ready to go to school, are now armed, hopefully, with strong executive function, good ability to relate to other, good use of language, and excellent control over their emotions. One of the key things is for us to build that serve and return style, and then layer language, and then layer reading into that. And it really does scaffold their ability to control their own brain and builds cognition for the future. A lot of great studies showing the outcomes are extremely strong all the way through life based on just this first 1,000 days. Questions, comments?